Carnival lights flickered against the backdrop of a darkening sky, casting long shadows that danced eerily over the cracked pavement. The smell of popcorn and cotton candy hung thick in the air, mingling with the distant strains of a calliope. Laughter and the occasional scream punctuated the steady hum of conversation, creating a cacophony that was both inviting and unsettling. Farah shivered as she stepped through the rusty turnstile, her friends close behind her. The carnival had an air of faded grandeur, like a relic of a bygone era struggling to maintain its former glory. Despite the wear and tear, there was something undeniably alluring about it, a sense of adventure tinged with just a hint of danger. "Look at that," Tom said, pointing to a particularly decrepit ride in the distance. "The Twisted Terror. I heard it's supposed to be the scariest ride here." Farah followed his gaze, squinting at the old wooden coaster that loomed ahead. Its rickety structure seemed barely able to support its own weight, let alone the weight of the thrill-seekers who dared to ride it. The name alone sent a chill down her spine. "Didn't someone die on that thing a few years back?" Laura asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and fear. She adjusted her glasses, peering at the ride with a mixture of apprehension and intrigue. "Yeah, I heard about that," Jake chimed in, wrapping an arm around Laura's shoulders. "A bunch of kids were on it when it derailed. They say it's haunted now." Farah rolled her eyes, though she couldn't deny the goosebumps rising on her arms. "Come on, you guys. It's just an old ride. There's no such thing as ghosts." Tom grinned, mischief lighting up his eyes. "Only one way to find out. Let's go." Despite her initial reluctance, Farah found herself following her friends toward the Twisted Terror. As they approached, the ride seemed to take on a life of its own. The wooden structure creaked and groaned, and the wind whistled through the gaps in the planks, creating an eerie melody that set her teeth on edge. The line for the ride was surprisingly short, and they soon found themselves standing at the entrance, where a bored-looking attendant waved them through with little more than a grunt. Farah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, though she dismissed it as nerves. As they took their seats, the safety bars clamping down with a metallic snap, Farah glanced around at her friends. Tom's excitement was palpable, while Laura and Jake seemed to share her unease. The attendant gave a half-hearted thumbs up, and the ride jolted to life, the clanking of the chain lift echoing through the night. The ascent was slow, painfully so, each click of the chain reverberating in Farah's ears like a countdown to something terrible. She tried to steady her breathing, but the higher they climbed, the more her anxiety grew. Below, the carnival seemed to shrink, the lights blurring into a kaleidoscope of colors. Just as they reached the peak, the ride halted. Farah's heart leapt into her throat as she looked around, trying to make sense of the sudden stop. The other passengers were equally confused, murmurs of concern spreading through the group. "Technical difficulties, folks," the attendant's voice crackled over the intercom, sounding far less reassuring than intended. "Please remain seated." Farah's grip on the safety bar tightened, her knuckles turning white. The seconds stretched into an eternity, the silence oppressive. Then, without warning, the ride plummeted. Farah's scream was lost in the chorus of terrified cries as they hurtled down the first drop, the world around them becoming a blur of shadows and neon lights. As they sped through the twists and turns, Farah's fear gave way to a strange sense of exhilaration. For a moment, she forgot about the ghost stories and the haunted past. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A figure stood on the tracks ahead, dressed in old-fashioned carnival attire. The apparition's eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and a sinister smile curled its lips. Farah's heart pounded in her chest as the figure vanished just as quickly as it had appeared, leaving her questioning her own sanity. Before she could process what she had seen, The ride jerked to a stop once more, this time in complete darkness. The screams of her friends echoed in the void, and Farah knew, with a sinking feeling, that their night at the carnival had only just begun. The ride creaked to a halt, leaving Farah and her friends suspended in a darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the very air around them. The once lively carnival sounds were muted, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed against their ears. "Is everyone okay?" Tom's voice broke the stillness, shaky but trying to sound confident. "Yeah," Farah replied, though her voice betrayed her fear. "What happened? Why did we stop?" Before anyone could respond, a soft whisper drifted through the darkness, barely audible over the pounding of their hearts. The words were indistinguishable, but the tone was unmistakable, pleading, desperate, and filled with sorrow. "Did you hear that?" Laura's voice was a trembling whisper. "Hear what?" Jake asked, his grip on the safety bar tightening. Someone's talking," Laura said, her eyes wide and searching the darkness. Another whisper floated through the air, this time clearer, the words more distinct. "Help us! Free us!" Farah's skin prickled with unease. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice echoing in the confined space. There was no response, only the oppressive silence and the faint scent of something old and musty. The ride shuddered, and dim lights flickered on, casting a weak glow over the twisted tracks. The friends looked around, their faces pale and drawn. The whispers had ceased, but the unsettling feeling remained. "We need to get off this thing," Jake said, his voice low and urgent. "Something's not right." Tom nodded, his bravado from earlier replaced by genuine fear. "Agreed. Let's see if we can find a way out." They unclasped their safety bars and climbed out of the ride, their movements hurried and clumsy in the confined space. As they made their way along the narrow walkway beside the tracks, Farah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The shadows seemed to shift and writhe, taking on forms just out of the corner of her eye. When they reached the exit platform, they found it deserted. The attendant who had sent them off was nowhere to be seen. The ticket booth was empty, the door hanging ajar as if someone had left in a hurry. "This is getting seriously creepy," Laura said, hugging herself for warmth. "Where is everyone?" As if in answer, a low moan emanated from the depths of the ride, a sound that chilled them to the bone. Farah turned towards the source, her heart hammering in her chest. "We need to find someone in charge," she said. "Maybe they can explain what's going on." The friends made their way through the carnival, which now felt like a ghost town. The vibrant colors and cheerful music seemed grotesque in the eerie silence. They passed darkened stalls and abandoned games, the once inviting attractions now looking like sinister traps. Finally, they reached the main office, a small building at the edge of the carnival grounds. The door was slightly open, and a dim light flickered inside. Farah pushed the door open with a creak, and they stepped into a cluttered room filled with old posters, ticket stubs, and faded photographs. Behind the desk sat an elderly man, his face lined with worry. He looked up as they entered, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and sadness. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice trembling. "The carnival. It's not safe." "We were on the Twisted Terror," Tom began, but the man cut him off with a wave of his hand. "I know where you were," he said, his gaze flicking nervously to the window. "That ride. It's cursed. Ever since the accident." "What accident?" Farah asked, her curiosity piqued despite her fear. The man sighed heavily, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Years ago, there was a terrible accident. The ride derailed and several people died. Their spirits, they've never left. They're trapped, and they're angry. Farah felt a chill run down her spine. But why? Why are they still here? Because their deaths were not an accident, the man replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The ride was sabotaged, and until the truth comes out, their souls will never rest. The friends exchanged uneasy glances. The whispers, the visions, the eerie feeling of being watched. It all made sense now. The spirits were trying to communicate, to tell their story. But who had sabotaged the ride? And why? We need to find out who did it, Farah said, determination hardening her voice. We need to help them. The man shook his head. It's dangerous. The spirits are vengeful. They might not distinguish between friend and foe. We have to try, Jake said firmly. We can't just leave them like this. The man sighed again, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. If you're determined, then start with the old maintenance records. They're in the storage shed behind the Ferris wheel. But be careful. The spirits, they don't like intruders. With that ominous warning, the friends set off toward the storage shed, the weight of their new mission heavy on their shoulders. The Carnival seemed to watch them with unseen eyes, the whispers of the past growing louder with every step. The night seemed to grow colder as Farah and her friends made their way toward the storage shed. The Ferris wheel loomed ahead, its skeletal structure silhouetted against the moonlit sky. The Carnival, once a place of joy and excitement, now felt like a graveyard of forgotten dreams and lingering spirits. Are we really doing this? Laura whispered, her voice barely audible over the crunch of gravel beneath their feet. We have to, Farah replied, though her heart was pounding in her chest. We need to know the truth. As they approached the shed, an old wooden structure barely holding itself together, Farah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced over her shoulder but saw nothing but the darkened carnival grounds. Tom pushed open the shed door with a creak, and they stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the smell of mildew. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with old tools, boxes, and yellowed papers. The dim light from a single bare bulb cast long shadows, making the room feel claustrophobic. Let's split up and look for the maintenance records, Tom suggested, trying to sound upbeat. They spread out, each taking a different section of the shed. Farah rifled through a stack of papers on a rickety desk, her eyes scanning the faded writing for anything that might give them a clue. Minutes ticked by and the silence grew more oppressive. Found something, Jake said suddenly, pulling out a dusty box from a low shelf. He set it on the desk and opened it, revealing a collection of old logbooks and maintenance records. Farah flipped through the pages, her fingers trembling slightly. Most of the entries were mundane, detailing routine checks and minor repairs. But then she found an entry dated the night of the accident. The handwriting was hurried, the words barely legible. Here, she said, pointing to the page. Listen to this. Suspicious activity noticed near the Twisted Terror. Unidentified person seen tampering with the tracks. Reported to management, but no action taken. Who wrote that? Laura asked, leaning in to read over Farah's shoulder. It's signed by someone named Henry, Farah said. We need to find out who Henry is and what he saw. The door to the shed suddenly slammed shut, and the bulb flickered, casting eerie shadows over the room. A chill ran down Farah's spine as the whispers returned, louder and more urgent this time. The words were still indistinguishable, but the desperation in them was unmistakable. We need to get out of here, Tom said, his voice tense. Now. They gathered the logbooks and hurried out of the shed, the door swinging shut behind them with a final, ominous thud. The carnival was eerily silent, the festive lights now dimmed and flickering. Let's go back to the main office, Jake suggested. Maybe the old man knows who Henry is. They made their way back through the deserted carnival, the whispers following them like a ghostly echo. When they reached the office, they found the door closed and the lights off. Farah knocked, but there was no answer. "Hello?" she called out, her voice wavering. "We found something." The door creaked open, and the old man peered out, his eyes wide with fear. "You shouldn't be here," he said again, his voice trembling. "They're angry." "We need to know who Henry is," Farah insisted, holding up the logbook. "He saw someone tampering with the tracks the night of the accident." The old man's face paled, and he stepped aside to let them in. "Henry was one of the maintenance workers," he said, sinking into a chair. "He tried to warn us, but no one listened. He disappeared shortly after the accident. Some say the spirits took him." "Do you know who might have sabotaged the ride?" Tom asked, leaning forward. The old man shook his head. "There were rumors, but nothing concrete. The owner, Mr. Blackwood, was a ruthless man. He had many enemies." Farah exchanged a look with her friends. "We need to find Mr. Blackwood," she said. "He might know more." "Good luck," the old man said, a bitter smile on his lips. "He hasn't been seen in years. Some say he's hiding, afraid of the spirit's revenge." "We'll find him," Jake said, determination in his voice. "We have to." As they left the office, Farah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The whispers followed them, but now they seemed to guide rather than frighten. They were on the right track, but they knew the road ahead would be filled with danger and uncertainty. Their night at the carnival was far from over. As the friends emerged from the main office, the carnival's oppressive atmosphere seemed to close in around them. The night had grown darker, the stars hidden behind thick clouds. The only light came from the flickering bulbs of the deserted rides and stalls, casting ghostly shadows that twisted and shifted with every step they took. "Where do we even start looking for Blackwood?" Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's an old house on the edge of the carnival grounds," the old man had said before they left. "It was Blackwood's. If he's anywhere, he might be there." With no other leads, they headed toward the edge of the carnival. The further they walked, the more isolated they felt, the noises of the carnival fading until there was nothing but silence. The old house came into view, a dilapidated structure that loomed over the surrounding area like a dark sentinel. "I don't like this," Laura said, clutching Jake's arm. "This place gives me the creeps." "Just stick together," Tom said, trying to sound reassuring. "We'll be in and out in no time." They approached the house cautiously, the wooden steps creaking under their weight. The front door was slightly ajar, swinging open with a low groan as they pushed it. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay, the remnants of a life long abandoned. As they stepped into the hallway, a sudden chill enveloped them. Farah shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. "Do you feel that?" "Yeah," Tom said, his breath visible in the cold air. "It's freezing in here." They moved through the house, their flashlights casting eerie beams that danced across the walls. The rooms were filled with old furniture, covered in white sheets that gave them a ghostly appearance. It was as if the house had been frozen in time, a mausoleum of memories. Suddenly, Farah stopped, her flashlight illuminating a faded photograph on the wall. It showed a group of carnival workers standing in front of the twisted terror, their faces beaming with pride. Among them was a stern-looking man in a dark suit, Mr. Blackwood. "This is him," Farah said, pointing to the man. "This is Blackwood." As they stared at the photograph, the air grew colder, and the house seemed to come alive with the sounds of the past. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, filling their ears with a cacophony of voices. "Do you hear that?" Jake asked, looking around nervously. Before anyone could answer, the walls around them began to shimmer, and the house seemed to dissolve into a different time. They found themselves standing in the same room, but it was now vibrant and alive. The smell of fresh paint and varnish filled the air, and they could hear the distant sound of carnival music. We're in the past, Laura said, her eyes wide with shock. They watched as ghostly figures moved through the room, their voices blending with the whispers. They saw Mr. Blackwood talking animatedly with a younger man who looked nervous and kept glancing around. "That's Henry," Tom said, recognizing the man from the maintenance records. The vision shifted, and they found themselves outside, near the Twisted Terror. They watched in horror as Henry was confronted by a group of men. The confrontation turned violent, and Henry was overpowered, his cries for help drowned out by the carnival's noise. As the men dragged Henry away, one of them glanced back, and Farah's blood ran cold. It was Blackwood, his face twisted in a sinister smile. The vision faded and they were back in the decaying house, the whispers growing more frantic. "We have to get out of here," Farah said, her voice trembling. "Now!" They rushed out of the house, the cold night air a welcome relief from the oppressive atmosphere inside. As they stood on the porch, catching their breath, Farah turned to her friends. Blackwood knew about the sabotage. He was involved. "We need to find him," Jake said, his jaw set with determination. "We need to make him pay for what he did." "But where do we even look?" Laura asked, fear evident in her eyes. Farah thought for a moment, then remembered something the old man had said. "The old records might have more clues. We need to go back to the shed and see what else we can find." With a renewed sense of purpose, they headed back toward the storage shed, the weight of their mission pressing heavily on their shoulders. The carnival seemed to watch them with unseen eyes, the whispers of the past guiding them toward a truth that was more terrifying than they could have imagined. The trek back to the storage shed was fraught with an unspoken tension. The whispers had grown louder, more insistent, as if the spirits themselves were urging the friends onward. The carnival's flickering lights cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to reach out for them. When they finally reached the shed, Farah pushed open the door with a creak. The dim light from the single bulb flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows over the cluttered interior. The friends wasted no time diving back into the piles of old maintenance records, searching for any clues that might point them to Blackwood. "This is hopeless," Laura muttered after what felt like an eternity. "There's so much stuff here." "Keep looking," Farah urged, flipping through another logbook. "There has to be something." Just as the frustration was about to boil over, Jake pulled out a dusty file from the bottom of a stack. "Hey, I think I found something," he said, excitement edging his voice. He opened the file and began reading. It's a series of letters between Blackwood and a private investigator. Looks like Blackwood was trying to cover his tracks after the accident. Farah grabbed one of the letters and scanned it quickly. "Listen to this. We need to ensure that no one ever finds out about our involvement. Take care of Henry and make sure all evidence is destroyed." "So he was behind it all along," Tom said, his face grim. "We need to find him and make him pay." Suddenly, the door to the shed slammed shut, and the light flickered out, plunging them into darkness. The whispers rose to a deafening chorus, filling the air with a sense of urgency and desperation. "What's happening?" Laura cried, grabbing onto Jake. "We need to get out of here," Farah shouted, fumbling for the door. But the door wouldn't budge, as if held shut by some unseen force. The walls of the shed began to tremble, and a cold wind whipped through the small space, bringing with it the faint scent of decay. Farah's heart pounded in her chest as she realized they were trapped. "Look!" Tom shouted, pointing to the far corner of the shed. The friends turned to see ghostly figures emerging from the shadows, their faces twisted in agony. They were the spirits of those who had died in the accident, their eyes filled with a mixture of rage and sorrow. "Help us," one of the spirits moaned, reaching out with a translucent hand. "Free us." Farah took a step back, her mind racing. "We're trying to help you," she said, her voice shaking. "We're trying to find Blackwood and bring him to justice." The spirits seemed to pause at her words, their forms flickering like candle flames in a breeze. Then, as if coming to a decision, they began to move toward the friends, their eyes filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Before Farah could react, the spirits passed through them, filling their minds with visions of the past. She saw flashes of the night of the accident, felt the terror and pain of the victims as the ride derailed. She saw Henry's desperate attempts to stop the sabotage and his final moments as he was overpowered and silenced. The visions were overwhelming, a torrent of emotions and images that threatened to drown her. But amidst the chaos, one image stood out, a hidden compartment beneath the twisted terror, where Henry had hidden crucial evidence before he was taken. Farah gasped as the vision faded, the realization hitting her like a punch to the gut. "The evidence," she said, her voice breathless. "It's hidden beneath the ride." The spirits seemed to nod in acknowledgement before fading into the shadows, the whispers growing fainter until they were once again alone in the shed. The door creaked open, and the light flickered back to life. "We need to get to the ride," Jake said, his voice filled with urgency. "If we can find that evidence, we can prove Blackwood's guilt." With their path clear, the friends rushed out of the shed and back toward the twisted terror. The ride loomed ahead of them, its twisted tracks and rickety structure more ominous than ever. As they approached, the wind picked up, and the ride seemed to come to life, creaking and groaning as if aware of their presence. Farah led the way, her heart pounding in her chest as they climbed onto the platform. The ride was still and silent, the safety bars locked in place. She dropped to her knees and began feeling around the base of the ride, searching for the hidden compartment from her vision. "There," Laura pointed, spotting a loose panel. Together they pried it open, revealing a small, dusty compartment. Inside, they found a bundle of papers, a rusted key, and a small, tarnished metal box. Farah grabbed the box and opened it, revealing a stack of photographs and a journal. The photographs showed Blackwood and his accomplices tampering with the ride, and the journal contained detailed notes of the sabotage. "This is it," Farah said, her voice filled with triumph. "This is the proof we need." But as they turned to leave, the ride suddenly roared to life, the safety bars slamming down and trapping them in place. The friends exchanged panicked glances as the ride began to move, dragging them along its twisted path. "We're trapped!" Jake shouted, struggling against the safety bar. The ride picked up speed, hurtling them through the dark, twisted tracks. Farah's heart raced as they were thrown from side to side, the world around them a blur of shadows and lights. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic, filling the air with a sense of impending doom. Just as they reached the highest point of the ride, the lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. The ride came to a sudden, jarring stop, leaving them suspended in the void. Farah's breath came in ragged gasps as she realized the true horror of their situation. They were trapped in a nightmare, caught between the vengeful spirits of the past and the dark secrets of the present. And the only way out was to confront the horrors that lay ahead. The ride hung suspended in the darkness, the world around them eerily silent. Farah's heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to free herself from the safety bar. Her friends' panicked breaths filled the air, a stark contrast to the oppressive quiet that surrounded them. "Is everyone okay?" Tom's voice was strained, trying to maintain a semblance of calm. "I'm stuck," Laura whimpered, her hands trembling as she tugged at the bar. Farah took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "We have to stay calm. There has to be a way out of this." Just as she said those words, a soft, spectral glow began to emanate from the center of the ride. The light grew brighter, revealing the ghostly figures of the victims who had perished in the accident. They floated toward the friends, their expressions a mix of sorrow and determination. "Help us," one of the spirits whispered, her translucent hand reaching out to Farah. "We're trying," Farah said, her voice trembling. "We found the evidence. We know Blackwood was responsible." The spirit nodded, her eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to stretch across time. "But it is not enough. You must confront him. Only then will we be free." Before Farah could respond, the ride jerked into motion, carrying them through a nightmarish sequence of scenes from the past. They saw the carnival as it once was, filled with life and laughter, only to be replaced by the horrifying vision of the accident. The screams of the victims echoed in their ears, mingling with the creaking of the wooden tracks. As they sped through the twisted path, Farah caught glimpses of Henry, his ghostly figure appearing and disappearing like a mirage. He was desperately trying to warn them, his eyes wide with fear. Farah realized that the spirits were not just seeking vengeance. They were trying to communicate, to guide them. The ride slowed to a crawl, and Farah found herself face to face with Henry's ghost, his eyes locked onto hers, filled with a silent plea. "What do you need us to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Henry's ghost pointed toward a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the ride. Farah's blood ran cold as she recognized Blackwood, his face twisted into a cruel smile. The ride came to a halt, and the friends were thrown into darkness once more. When the lights flickered back on, they found themselves in a different part of the carnival, standing before a decrepit funhouse. The garish paint was peeling, and the entrance yawned open like a hungry mouth. Blackwood's figure stood at the entrance, his eyes gleaming with malevolence. "Welcome," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I see you've discovered my little secret." Farah stepped forward, clutching the evidence they had found. "We know what you did," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "You sabotaged the ride and killed those people." Blackwood laughed, a hollow sound that sent shivers down their spines. "And what do you plan to do about it? The authorities have long forgotten about that night. No one will believe a bunch of meddling kids." "We have proof," Jake said, holding up the photographs and journal. "You're going to pay for what you did." Blackwood's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold fury. "You think you can stop me? I've been hiding for years, and I've become quite good at it." Before anyone could react, the ground beneath them shook, and the funhouse seemed to come alive. The walls twisted and shifted, trapping them in a maze of distorted mirrors and eerie laughter. Farah's heart raced as they were separated, each of them thrown into a different part of the funhouse. "Stay together!" she shouted, her voice echoing through the labyrinth. But her friends were already out of sight, their cries for help blending with the haunting sounds of the funhouse. Farah stumbled through the maze, her reflection staring back at her from every angle. The mirrors distorted her image, stretching and twisting her features until she barely recognized herself. She knew she had to find her friends and confront Blackwood, but the funhouse seemed determined to keep them apart. As she turned a corner, she came face to face with Henry's ghost once more. His eyes were filled with a desperate urgency. "You must find the heart of the funhouse," he said, his voice echoing in her mind. "It is there that Blackwood's power is strongest." Farah nodded, determination hardening her resolve. "I'll find it, and we'll end this." With renewed purpose, she navigated the twisted corridors of the funhouse, her fear giving way to a fierce determination. She could hear the distant cries of her friends, and she followed their voices, hoping to find them before it was too late. Finally, she reached the center of the funhouse, a large room filled with more distorted mirrors and strange, flickering lights. Blackwood stood in the middle, his eyes gleaming with a twisted sense of victory. "You think you can defeat me?" he sneered. "I am the master of this place. The spirits are bound to me, and so are you." Farah held up the evidence, her hands steady. "This is the proof of your guilt. The spirits won't rest until justice is served." Blackwood laughed again, but this time there was a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "Justice? There is no justice here, only revenge." As if in response, the spirits of the victims appeared around them, their faces filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. They reached out to Blackwood, their ghostly hands glowing with an ethereal light. "No!" Blackwood screamed, but it was too late. The spirits engulfed him, their light growing brighter and brighter until it filled the entire room. Farah shielded her eyes, feeling the power of the spirits wash over her. When the light finally faded, Blackwood was gone, and the funhouse was silent. The spirits hovered around Farah, their faces peaceful for the first time. "Thank you," one of them whispered before fading away into the ether. Farah's friends stumbled into the room, their faces pale but filled with relief. "Is it over?" Laura asked, her voice shaking. Farah nodded, a sense of calm settling over her. "It's over. The spirits are free." As they made their way out of the funhouse, the carnival seemed to come alive once more. The lights brightened and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. They had faced their fears, confronted the past, and emerged victorious. But as they left the carnival behind, Farah couldn't shake the feeling that their lives would never be the same. They had seen the darkness that lurked beneath the surface, and they had come out the other side stronger. But the memories of that night would haunt them forever, a reminder of the horrors they had faced and the courage it took to overcome them. The friends emerged from the funhouse, the carnival's oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly, but still carrying an undercurrent of unease. The sky was beginning to lighten with the approaching dawn, casting a gray hue over the carnival grounds. The air was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat they had felt earlier. "We need to get out of here," Tom said, his voice weary but determined. "We have the evidence. Let's take it to the authorities and put an end to this." As they walked back towards the twisted terror, Farah couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being watched. The whispers had faded, but the sensation of eyes following their every move lingered. She glanced over her shoulder repeatedly, half expecting to see Blackwood or one of the spirits. The ride loomed ahead, silent and still. The hidden compartment where they had found the evidence was now empty, but its significance weighed heavily on them. As they reached the platform, the safety bars of the ride suddenly sprang up, almost inviting them to take one last ride. "Do we have to go back on?" Laura asked, her voice trembling. "Can't we just leave?" "We need to make sure there's nothing else hidden here," Farah said, though her stomach churned at the thought of another ride. "If there's more evidence, we can't leave it behind." Reluctantly, they climbed into the ride once more. The safety bars clamped down, and the ride jolted to life, moving with a deliberate slowness that only heightened their anxiety. As the ride ascended, the creaking of the wooden tracks sounded almost like a dirge. The ride began to move faster, hurtling them through the twisted path. Farah's heart pounded as they plunged into darkness, the wind whipping past them. This time, the ride felt different, more controlled, more purposeful. The visions began again, but instead of the chaotic flashes of the past, they were now clearer, more coherent. They saw Henry's ghost again, standing by the tracks, pointing to a hidden lever near the base of the ride. Farah's eyes widened as she realized what he was indicating. "There's another compartment," she shouted over the noise of the ride. "We need to pull that lever." As the ride approached the spot, Tom reached out and pulled the lever with all his might. The ride screeched to a halt, and a hidden panel in the tracks slid open, revealing a small, dusty compartment. Inside, they found another bundle of papers, even more incriminating than the last. "This is it," Jake said, his voice filled with awe. "This is the proof we need to take Blackwood down." Before they could celebrate, the ride began to move again, this time in reverse. The wind whipped past them as they were hurtled back to the starting point, the safety bars lifting as they came to a stop. "We need to get out of here," Farah said, clutching the papers tightly. "Now." They scrambled out of the ride and made their way towards the exit of the carnival. As they approached the gate, the whispers returned, this time more soothing, almost grateful. Farah glanced back one last time, seeing the ghostly figures of the victims watching them, their faces peaceful. "Thank you," one of the spirits whispered, before fading away into the dawnlight. The friends hurried through the gate and into the safety of the outside world. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the landscape. The carnival, once a place of nightmares, now seemed almost tranquil in the early morning light. As they made their way to the nearest police station, Farah felt a sense of relief wash over her. They had faced the horrors of the past and emerged victorious. But she knew their journey was not over. They had to ensure Blackwood faced justice for his crimes, to finally bring peace to the restless spirits. At the police station, they handed over the evidence, recounting their harrowing experience to the incredulous officers. The weight of their ordeal began to lift as the officers took their statements, promising to investigate and bring Blackwood to justice. As they left the station, Farah turned to her friends, a tired but triumphant smile on her face. "We did it," she said. "We really did it." Tom nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Yeah, we did. But I don't think I'll be going to a carnival anytime soon." The friends laughed, the sound a welcome release of tension. They had survived a night of terror and uncovered a dark secret. And though the memories of their ordeal would stay with them, they knew they had done the right thing. As they walked away from the police station, the first rays of the morning sun breaking through the clouds, they felt a sense of closure. The haunted carnival ride had tried to trap them in its web of darkness, but they had escaped, bringing light to the shadows of the past. Farah, Tom, Laura, and Jake returned to the carnival later that afternoon, determined to confront the remaining mysteries. The authorities had promised to investigate Blackwood and the evidence they had uncovered, but Farah felt there was more they needed to do to lay the spirits to rest completely. The once terrifying grounds now seemed eerily quiet in the daylight, the ride standing still as if waiting. "We have to find the spot where the ride derailed," Farah said as they walked toward the Twisted Terror. "That's where it all began." The ride looked less menacing in the sunlight, but its history still cast a long shadow. The friends approached the tracks, following Farah's lead as she carefully examined the area. It didn't take long to find the marks, scratches and dents that indicated where the ride had jumped the rails years ago. "This is it," Farah said, pointing to the spot. "This is where we need to start." As they stood there, the whispers returned, soft but persistent, urging them onward. The air grew colder, and the light seemed to dim slightly as if the past were reaching out to them once more. Farah felt a presence nearby, a sense of sadness and longing that tugged at her heart. "We're here to help," she said softly, addressing the unseen spirits. "We know what happened, and we're going to make it right." A ghostly figure materialized in front of them. Henry, the maintenance worker who had tried to prevent the tragedy. His spectral form flickered like a candle flame in the wind, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sorrow. "Thank you," Henry whispered, his voice carrying on the breeze. "But there is still one more thing you must do." The friends listened intently as Henry explained. There was a hidden room beneath the carnival grounds, a place where Blackwood had kept records of all his misdeeds. It was there that they would find the final piece of the puzzle. Henry led them to a small, unassuming building at the edge of the carnival. The door creaked open, revealing a staircase leading down into darkness. Farah took a deep breath and led the way, her friends close behind. The basement was cold and damp, the walls lined with old boxes and rusting equipment. In the center of the room was a large, locked cabinet. Farah used the rusted key they had found earlier to open it, revealing a trove of documents and photographs. As they sifted through the contents, they found detailed records of Blackwood's activities, bribes, sabotage, and even threats against those who had tried to oppose him. It was clear that Blackwood had been running a criminal enterprise, using the carnival as a front. "This is it," Farah said, holding up a thick file. "This is the evidence we need to bring him down for good." But before they could leave, the room grew colder, and the whispers turned into a low, menacing growl. The friends turned to see a dark, shadowy figure materializing in the corner. Blackwood's spirit, his eyes glowing with malevolent rage. "You think you can stop me?" he snarled, his voice echoing through the room. "I am eternal. The carnival will always belong to me." Farah stood her ground, clutching the file tightly. "No, it won't. You hurt so many people, but it ends now. We're going to make sure of it." Blackwood's spirit lunged at them, but the ghostly figures of Henry and the other victims appeared, forming a protective barrier around the friends. The spirit's combined light grew brighter and brighter, pushing Blackwood back. "You cannot defeat me!" Blackwood screamed, his form flickering and distorting. The spirits pressed forward, their light intensifying until it became blinding. Blackwood's scream turned into a wail of despair as he was consumed by the light, his form dissipating into nothingness. When the light finally faded, the room was silent. The spirits of the victims turned to Farah and her friends, their expressions peaceful. "Thank you," Henry said, his form beginning to fade. "You have freed us." The friends watched as the spirits slowly disappeared, leaving them alone in the basement. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of calm and closure. "Let's get this to the authorities," Tom said, his voice steady. "It's time for Blackwood to face justice." With the final evidence in hand, they made their way back to the police station. The officers were astonished by the new information, and they assured the friends that Blackwood's criminal empire would be dismantled. As they left the station, Farah felt a sense of peace. They had confronted the horrors of the past and emerged victorious. The spirits were finally at rest, and Blackwood would no longer haunt the carnival. "Do you think it's really over?" Laura asked as they walked away. Farah nodded, a smile touching her lips. "Yes, it's over. The carnival is free." As they headed home, the sun set behind them, casting long shadows over the town. The friends knew that they would never forget the night they had faced their fears and uncovered the dark secrets of the Twisted Terror. But they also knew that they had done the right thing. bringing justice to those who had been wronged and freeing the spirits from their torment. And as the night fell, the carnival stood silent and still, finally at peace. The days following the confrontation with Blackwood were a blur of police interviews and media attention. The town buzzed with the news of the haunted carnival and the friends who had uncovered the dark truth. Farah, Tom, Laura, and Jake found themselves both celebrated and scrutinized, their story retold with embellishments and varying degrees of disbelief. One evening, after the dust had begun to settle, the friends decided to revisit the carnival one last time. They needed closure, a final farewell to the place that had haunted their nightmares and tested their courage. As they approached the grounds, the familiar mix of nostalgia and apprehension settled over them. The carnival was eerily quiet, the ride still and the lights dimmed. The atmosphere was markedly different from that fateful night, yet a sense of finality lingered in the air. The Twisted Terror loomed in the distance, its once menacing structure now appearing almost benign in the fading twilight. "I can't believe we're back here," Laura said, her voice tinged with apprehension. "After everything we went through." "We need to make sure it's really over," Farah replied, leading the way towards the Twisted Terror. "To say goodbye." As they reached the ride, the safety bars opened with a smooth, almost welcoming motion. The friends exchanged uneasy glances but climbed into the seats. Farah took a deep breath, feeling the familiar adrenaline surge through her veins. The ride began to move, slowly ascending the first hill. The ride was different this time. There were no sudden stops, no ghostly apparitions. Instead, it felt almost serene, the wind whispering gently through the night. As they crested the first hill, the carnival spread out below them, a tapestry of memories both dark and bright. They plunged down the first drop, the thrill of the ride mingling with a sense of release. The friends laughed, the sound echoing through the night, a cathartic release of all the fear and tension that had built up over the past few days. The twists and turns felt like a dance, a final graceful performance before the curtain fell. As the ride slowed and came to a stop, the friends remained in their seats, the silence around them almost reverent. Farah felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a sense of peace settling over her. "It's really over," Tom said, his voice filled with awe. "We did it." Farah nodded, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "We did." They climbed out of the ride and stood together, looking up at the Twisted Terror. The moonlight cast a soft glow over the tracks, giving the old wood an almost ethereal quality. Farah felt a sense of closure, a finality that resonated deep within her. "We should go," Jake said gently. "There's nothing left for us here." As they turned to leave, the whispers returned, but this time they were soft and soothing, like a lullaby. Farah looked back one last time and saw the faint, ghostly figures of the spirits they had freed. They were smiling, their faces filled with gratitude and peace. "Goodbye," Farah whispered, feeling a tear slip down her cheek. "Rest in peace." As they reached the edge of the carnival grounds, Farah looked back one last time. The Twisted Terror stood silent and still, a testament to their courage and determination. She smiled, knowing that they had done the right thing, and that the past was finally at rest. "Let's go home," she said, linking arms with her friends. "We've earned it." Together, they walked into the night, leaving the haunted carnival behind them. The stars shone brightly above, guiding them home, and the whispers of the past were finally silent.